Oh, hey. Didn't see you there. I was just washing up my costume for Halloween, you know. Gotta get ready for the special, you know. Oh. Yeah, right. Looks like I got a bit of explaining to do. But first... Okay, that wasn't me. I'm just gonna put this out there, I am a massive coward when it comes to horror games. In nearly any other genre, you'd see me completely dead silent, only reacting when something big happens, like any old Joe that people try to convince you is normal. With horror games, though, I'll say I am exactly like those Let's Players you've seen. When people say, oh, those guys overreact way too hard, just show them my playthrough of Resident Evil 7 in assisted mode. They won't be saying that to poor old Mark ever again once they see real world evidence, just saying. However, there's a certain point in horror for me where if something in it becomes way too normalized and ingrained into my head, then it becomes less of something scary and more something tedious and teeth-grindingly infuriating. This feeling I get is exactly why I don't really care for many jumpscare or FPS type horror games, since they're the biggest contenders for this type of thing, but not every one of them, from my personal experience, gives me that exact same feeling. If giving me a chance to sit in this office and poke at the door and light switches is supposed to be an accurate depiction of a 9-to-5 low-class American job, then congrats! I'm unemployed. One type of horror I'll be discussing that almost always hits the mark is the type that catches you off guard, yet somehow fits perfectly into the world you've gotten yourself into. Take any other genre, platformer, RPG, action, etc., and tie that into a more elegant or clean sort of atmosphere. Then out of the blue, grind up some chalk, smear it across the walls, and tell the player you're its bitch, and then you'll slap them right back into reality. I've seen plenty of other media do something along these lines. You have movies like The Blair Witch Project and The Wicker Man, which attempt to make a spin of what I'd like to call fiction based in reality. They are what I consider to be extremely top of the line, because they bend the lines of fiction's effect on our world by making smaller and smaller distinctions between the two, making the horror effect that much more effective because of those said blurred lines. The games I'm discussing, however, have an opposite effect, where you're grounded in fiction, but then it starts to slowly pull parts of that reality into it, and then blurs the lines from there, giving it an almost uncanny effect to something that was supposed to throw you out of reality. My name is Mesmo, and you are watching The Art of Unconventional Horror in Video Games. Alright, time to get the easy pick out of the way. Kirby is hands down the #1 candidate for most gamers to be the premier example of a cuddly, friendly exterior hiding something ghastly underneath. It's almost become a meme at this point of how a game like it can spew such a gruesome exposition at the press of a start button. For people outside of the fan base, there was some difficulty pinpointing where exactly this motif in the series started off from. Some say that it only started to ramp up when Shinya Kumazaki, an eldritch horror artist, took the helm of the director's chair for the series back in 2008, while some others may say it was like that since the dawn of time, when Kirby still had that pale and white-toned skin. To both of those, I say... Wrong! Alright, so... hear me out on this. Between 1995 and 2000, 3 Kirby games were released under the direction of Shinichi Shimomura, without any guidance from Masahiro Sakurai, the series director at the time. Although one of them doesn't technically fall under the Dreamland subtitle, all 3 of them share similarities in both story and characters that make them fall under an unofficial yet similarly recognized stylistic trilogy. These games are Kirby's Dream Land 2, 3, and 64 The Crystal Shards, all culminating into what is considered by fans to be the Dark Matter trilogy. The chain that holds this string of games together is none other than Dark Matter, a floating black eyeball whose species is rooted in darkness, negative energy, energy, and possession, for either control of other beings of life or even entire planets. Their individual goals differ from matter to matter, but they all hail from loneliness and outright jealousy due to their negative nature. Their influence and corruption spread throughout the whole series, but for the sake of this video, I'll only be taking a look at the dark matter within the trilogy and their actions within it. In Kirby's Dream Land 2, they were at their arguable weakest, since only one member and a couple of their buddies were sent to do any considerable damage to the spoiled Dreamlanders. The only real difference would be that member turning into a brave little sword fighter halfway through his fight. I say, look at that jolly man go, swinging his stick around like a gentleman, letting our boy Kirby get in a few blows in. Ain't he a gentleman and a marvelous fighter? Oh, well, he was, but that chap put up a fight, I'd say. Good show, jolly good show. The big guns would get deployed around the end of Kirby's Dream Land 3, where he possesses King Dedede once again, and gives him a convenient, albeit horrifying second mouth around his stomach. Now, instead of having to fight one abomination of mankind, you get to fight a whole factory's worth. Meet Zero, the creator and leader of the dark matter, who has taken over all Dreamland and resides in the Hyperzone, awaiting Kirby's uber positivity to rain down on them. Zero has two phases, one where they charge into you, shoot out mini dark matters at you like it's nobody's business, and fire out blood pellets from its sclera. Yeah, this is pretty weird, all things considered, but compared to the second phase though, yeah, that don't look too good, man. You might want to get that checked out with your doctor. Yeah, imagine some kid walking up to a SNES cartridge in a store back in the 90s with Kirby's Dream Land 3 on it, sees the cute characters and thinks, yeah, totally won't get traumatized by that anyway. Then they go back home, 100% the game in time for bed in a few minutes, then sees this motherfucker get his iris ripped out of its socket in the most borderline gory way imaginable, shits themselves to bed, then tells all their friends about it the very next day. This is how you properly subvert audience expectations with the game's atmosphere and make a truly memorable enemy. Not even the likes of Mario and Metroid, with all their instances of graphic imagery, would dare to show blood for more than a split second at most. Here, it is literally thrown in your face. Cut to the end when they're defeated and they explode into a bloodbath. Even after that, the true fight with them isn't really over, since if you collected all the crystal shards in 64, you get to fight 02, floating with ribbon in the colossal sphere known as Dark Star. Here, they become an even more grotesque and Lovecraftian creature, as they grow wings, a halo, cactus tail, and even wear a bandage to signify the war scar from their last battle. Even the music in this is a lot more somber than last game's frantic display, which might show that they know Kirby's true power, and part of them have already given up the fight, realizing that despite their godlike powers spanning across the entire universe, they might have lost before they even started fighting. In the end, what is a life that holds nothing but darkness even worth? Or, you know, they just got stronger, that too. Speaking of strength, let's test that wave dashing form of yours. Before the days of Ultimate, Super Smash Bros. Melee was the first entry in the series to bring back the full cast of the games that came before it. To date, I consider it to be the most improved sequel to a game that I know of, with higher octane gameplay, refinements, and new modes off the wazoo. Regardless of your feelings of the title today, you can't deny the impact it had on not only Smash Bros., but also the fighting game community as a whole. It's a real shame Nintendo themselves deny it every step of the way. Looking back on the game now, it's easy to see why a lot of people, including myself, consider this a somewhat spookier title, both intentionally and unintentionally. Given the game's release as a GameCube launch title, Melee didn't have much reference to go by current gen-wise when improving upon or adding to most of the cast, and thus had to port over N64 era materials for upscaling onto the GameCube. This in turn gave a rather uncanny look and feel to certain characters when brought over. One example of this includes Bowser, a villain who is well known for having a lighthearted, comical side in his early years, portrayed as a blood-hungry kaiju in the eyes of Masahiro Sakurai. This is most evident in Melee's Adventure mode, where after you've completed in normal mode and higher, in 18 minutes or less, during the cutscene playing after his demise, you might notice the loading beginning to take a little bit longer than usual. Before you can even form a cohesive thought, this happens. Now you'd think this would obviously be the next logical step after the dark, ominous Master Hand from the last game, right? After all, this is the one of only 2 games that carry a T rating. They gotta show for it somehow. Now the shocker here that puts it in this vid is how they somehow managed to upgrade this into this. They improved on perfection in horrifying Koopa form, and for that, the dudes at HAL who worked on this deserve the entire world. Not only is Giga Bowser a universal threat the size of a building, but he was built up in a way that would partially benefit later installments, with the subspace emissaries, everything, the Master Core, and pretty much all of Ultimate's Digital Frontier made trailers. He's that influential. He's more than likely been influential for how frustrating he was to take on in Event 51 to get that sweet chain grab destination. Thanks, Jason. There's also a theory going around in my head about him that I either haven't seen discussed too often or it has and I have the memory span of a goldfish. Do you know how Giga Bowser was formed out of Bowser's trophy not too long after he was flung into the blast zone? What if, and this might be a little bit of a stretch, what if every character with that trophy revival in mind had just as much opportunity to get a Giga form as Bowser did? There could be tons of opportunities for that gimmick in Smash's future if it's real. Like, imagine bosses like Giga Ridley, Giga Mewtwo, Giga Ganon. Wait, scratch that. All I'm saying is, Nintendo, Sakurai, you have the power in your hands to create possibly one of the greatest art trends in all of gaming. And all you gotta do for Smash 6 is just make this concept a reality. You've already got billions of dollars in that Nintendo vault right now, but I'm assuming you could make about trillions with this. Just saying. But for now, we've got bigger fish to fry. Cat, rabbit, skunk, who cares? He's cute anyways. Klonoa is another example of a game franchise where a cute, cuddly exterior could hide something dark and sinister. While I wouldn't say the entire series has that corrupted and twisted vibe like some of Kirby bosses do, it more than makes up for it with its more nuanced and crafted storytelling. In other words, he's the opposite of dumb, stupid, boring, crappy, pathetic, silly, hardly there, uninspired, flat, dull, and childish.
Yum yum yum.
A real shame too, since after his first game, Door to Phantom Isle, our little dream traveler wouldn't see quite as much success right down the road. Also, unfortunately, this would mean that Klonoa 2, the title I'll be discussing here, and arguably the most important and quality entry in the series, hasn't gotten the love it deserves, even 20 years later. Despite being an E-rated platformer, Klonoa 2 isn't afraid to overcome boundaries in storytelling within the genre, and deliver on some of the most heart-aching themes that they could achieve back in the day. While Klonoa 1's ending was a huge snap of the heartstring, Klonoa 2 opts for a slow burn approach that allows for a different build-up throughout the story that makes the ending that much more powerful of a send-off. This can't be stated any more prominently than with the King of Sorrow. Being the final boss of the game, and as I currently speak, the final battle of the series, he sets himself up perfectly just by origin alone. Similarly to the Dark Matter, Sorrow was spawned and bathed in pure negativity. He was a ruler of Huponia, the Kingdom of Sorrow, and the Fifth Kingdom of Lunatea. Over time, however, that would soon change. As the people started refusing to accept sadness and sorrow, he was soon shunned and separated from the rest of the kingdoms, leaving him to wallow in emptiness for nearly his entire life. You can even see it in his appearance, since his eyes have gone bloodshot red from crying. The boss fight itself, while it isn't special difficulty-wise, it does make a very good use of the game's mechanics up to that point, and does end up providing a very fair fight overall. The real strengths lie in its atmosphere and setup for the battle itself, as it slowly takes up a tone where you start to feel like you really don't want to fight this guy after all. He's one of those battles that we'd call tragic boss fights over here. The first phase utilizes the hoverboard, like some previous stages and bosses, but with a twist around how the arena is structured, in that it's spherical rather than linear. Also, Sorrow mutates into this crazy beast here to launch spike balls and enemies for you to sling back at him. Pretty crazy ride, and the beast is creepy to boot, making the analogy of Sorrow being this hollow husk that was abandoned for years, creating this abomination out of pure unsustained sorrow, and not going down without a fight. The second phase might have been him signaling the white flag, however, as difficulty takes a bit of a nosedive once you actually figure out how his attack system works. He deforms back into his original state as Klonoa's ring reacts to Leorena's increased power and weakens him, forcing him to confide in a battle-ready spirit to protect himself. Of course, it would prove useless, since his defense weapons can be sent right back at him through his little lightning bubble thing. Once he's defeated, rather than putting this poor Sorrow out of his misery, he instead rings the bell powering the castle itself, putting Sorrow back in with the rest of the world and restoring order to Lunatea as a whole. In turn, this provides a yin to Zero's yang, telling us that a world filled with nothing but light would blind us from life's truth. In the end, maybe darkness is a sign to tell us that imperfection isn't all that bad to think about after all. Remember this the next time people tell you that the series is way too kiddie. Now, speaking of kiddie, let's talk about a game that is far from it. I am in firm belief that one of Killer 7's biggest strengths lies in defying the laws of genre and storytelling in video game format. Mixed within its bloody atmosphere and colorful comic book stylized lighting hides a surprising depth of plot and level of unconventional horror that I feel hasn't been replicated in any game after its release. Thanks to Suda51's direction and Shinji Mikami's advice, it became a major highlight in the niche gaming spectrum, and even may have been a hidden inspiration for future titles that are beloved by many to this day. While I am glad it is steadily gaining exposure based on word of mouth and pure quality alone, I find that this game is best experienced for yourself with as little spoilers as possible, so...
What the fuck are you waiting for? Go buy it and play it right now!
I'll even pause the video to give you a head start. Go check it out. You good? Okay, good. So now you'll be able to understand why I think Encounter as a whole was one of the most terrifying experiences I've ever laid my eyes, ears, and fingers upon. Now, pictured with the rest of the game at a glance, this chapter doesn't seem like anything special, no? Well, to put it bluntly, imagine the gruesomeness and dark themes you've experienced in the first chapter, roll them all up into a carpet and smoke it like a huge blunt. That's what you get with Curtis Blackburn, a former member of the Seattle Defense Force turned children's organ smuggler. And his first order of business? Why, shoot up the Seattle Immigration Bureau, of course. The whole secret agent style, too. Yeah, you gotta love that initial moral ambiguity. Anyways, this in turn prompts the Killer 7 to investigate Land Amusement Park, since it was found that the place is being used by Blackburn as a front for human trafficking and artificial heaven smile creation via the organs. Later in the back parking lot of the place, it's revealed that Blackburn has a daughter, Ayame Blackburn, who wears anime cosplay, and roller skates, and a machine gun, and a bus full of orphans. I'm starting to think that Blackburn might have a type. Quite literally the biggest diss to Japanese fetish culture as a whole. Now, when it came down to previous Killer 7 chapters, they obviously had a huge, major, serious tone when it came down to crucial plot points, but they were on a level where it was absurd enough that you'd be able to distinguish it from the world around you. For Encounter, though, well...
If you're looking to play doubles, go find someone else, alright?
Do I look like a guy who wants to play doubles?
Yeah, it looks like the clown's out of the circus. Is raiding their streets. It still thinks it's 2016. It's gotta represent his homies down at the crypts. I mean, talk about a display here! Pedro, a cohort of Curtis's, witnessing the entire squash club get eviscerated, gets sent down on his hands and knees, begging for mercy, to realize that Curtis already took everyone that even mattered to him before he went with them by the end. Everything about the scene gets to me. Just the sinister music, the way Curtis taunts Pedro with his acts of violence, and Pedro's scream for bloody murder at the sight of his own daughter's severed head. It feels straight at home with something you'd see in a Takashi Miike film, with whom Suda admitted to be an inspiration, and even got a cameo appearance for No More Heroes 2 and 3, which are definitely not on the Nintendo eShop right now. We can get it on the Nintendo Switch, no way. No, definitely not experiences of a lifetime, no sir. Even he would come to recognize how disturbing this chapter was. Since soon after Blackburn's dance to death with the main man Dan Smith would come arguably the game's funnest and least serious chapter in the form of Alter Ego. Not to mention, the game's sexiest and most dangerous villain. Meow. Wait, who put that in the script? For all it's worth, however, let this stand as a note of how impressive Killer 7 is, both as a standalone story and as a piece of art. Nearly every aspect of it can be considered timeless, and I believe Curtis helps make that point near single-handedly story-wise. Suda even mentions that because of how heinous in nature Curtis is compared to the rest of the Killer 7 villain ensemble, there could easily be people out there who are just as deranged and bloodthirsty as him for even less reasons. The world is a truly unpredictable place. This last segment is a bit more of a personal one for me, not in a way that traumatized me severely, but in the end actually ended up making me a much better person as I stand right now. Let me take you back to the early 2010s and introduce you to video game creepypastas. Or a non-introduction, since it doesn't really need any intro. You can certainly piece together that it's basically campfire stories in copy-pasta format just by reading the term alone, no? Though mostly cliched in nature, you can't deny they helped establish people into social networks that pertain to their more niche tastes in horror at a near global scale. Despite this, it's not uncommon anymore to find at least one individual on the web who got traumatized by a story of their favorite gaming superhero turned sadistic hyper-realistic killer. I know this because I used to be one of those people. And for how much I absolutely loathe stories like Sonic.exe and what it did for the medium as a whole nowadays, that was the game that did it for me back when I was little. Let me paint you a vivid picture, if I may. Imagine you're around 8 or 9 years old, give or take, scrolling through the YouTube recommended tab to see what you can rot your brain to. Then you stop and notice a headshot of a deformed, bloody, and photorealistic depiction of a character you grew up on pop up on your feed. I have a feeling you end up taking it quite as bravely as you think you would have, because nearly everyone was like that at some point. Some more than others, but similarly blissful ignorance. We were all petty baby cowards. Hell, I got spooked out of my chair once by a Jeff the Killer jump scare embedded in a Google Plus era YouTube comment. Imagine how worse it would have been if that ended up being malware as well, considering it was a link. And the fucking internet sucks, doesn't it? Hell, there's even some new folks just coming into these sites getting spooked out of their minds by this stuff. And even veterans to the horror genre get spooked by some of the stories to this day. And you know what? That's completely fine. As long as a piece of horror has something that's even deservedly unsettling about it, it's completely fine to show outright fear of it, as long as it doesn't get to a level where it's affected your life in any meaningful way. There are dozens out there with phobias that can be considered unorthodox and even outright irrational, but don't forget, your struggle is completely justified. People all around see the world in completely different angles, some not even to their own will, and we as people should learn to respect that, since everyone is going through their own battles that others haven't even learned to fight yet. Whoever you are watching this right now, I want you to know that while you may not be special in your struggles, you are in how you face those struggles and come back as a new person. And that, my friends, is true convention breaking. Take care of yourselves, and remember to be the light in this never-ending darkness. Thank you for watching.